Hello and welcome back, beautiful soul. Today we are doing another podcast episode with the beautiful Jamie Saloff. She's been a part of at least one of our summits way back a couple of years ago. And this is Permission to Follow Your Inner GPS, your guided purpose soul path video podcast series. I'm your host, the Angel Lady Terry Marie, an intuitive empath coach who helps her clients blast through the BS, blind spots, or the other BS to get through so that they can open up their channels for receiving opportunities, prosperity, and really stepping into themselves and into who they are more than they already are right now. So please help me welcome the beautiful Jamie Saloff. She is the founder of The Body Messenger. She uses pain to help. Well, we're going to get into that because I'm not exactly sure how she does that, but she does it in such a unique way. My mind went blank. I'm sorry. She uses pain to help her clients get to a better place. So without further ado, please welcome Jamie Saloff. Hello, gorgeous. Thank you for being here.
That's totally fine. I sometimes get confused about what I do too because I wear so many different hats and I have gone through so many different, I like to think of it as different like lifetimes. I've lived like several lifetimes in this one little adventure of a life. So it's easy to get confused.
I get that. I think my path has had several iterations over the last 10 years too. And it's like, okay, what am I doing now? It's basically the same thing, right? It's just in a different way.
Oh, I like to mix it all up.
You like to mix it all up. So tell us about your journey. Tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are now.
Okay, I'll keep it to the short version.
Okay.
So what I kind of like to tell people sometimes is that I went to my first funeral when I was still a baby in arms. I had my first stitches when I was 2. By the time I was in, 20, at 24, I nearly bled to death. At 25, I had cancer. At 26, I gave premature birth. I've been in a coma. I've been in a car accident. I've just recently had breast cancer. And, you know, what I have found is that a lot of people have gone through these kinds of ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of the things that we've kind of been trained when we're on, let's say on the woo-woo sides of things is that, you know, doctors treat symptoms and don't try to find the cause. And I find with our life, I mean, I got through one thing and I'd be like, oh, I got through that. And then I would go into another and I'd be like, how do I stop these things from happening? You know, it was like, I don't need to just treat the cause anymore. I need to find the symptom or the thing that's causing it. I need to go down into the core of it. And so I think that's really what I do is I don't look at the outer surface. I try to find like a life transformation. I try to go from I took my life from good to great, and I try to help other people go from good to great. And on my one book, you'll see that there's a butterfly, and what could be better than, you know, for some of us, okay, maybe being a caterpillar is fine, right? But how much better is it being a butterfly and having that whole world to explore and find interesting? And I think that so many times life gets kind of like too simplified as far as like what people try to bring on as far as cures, and people will say, oh, can you make my pain stop? Can you give me a cure? And I'm like, I actually go far deeper than that. It's so much bigger than that. And so that's why I kind of created the Body Messenger method. And that was kind of like taking what I had learned over the last 30 years from being sick and getting well and being sick and getting well, and then having like 30 years where I was like, great. And then all of a sudden, bam, you know, like this breast cancer thing comes up. And I was like, oh, I get it. You know, there was another transformation that I needed to go through. There was other things I yet needed to learn. And it was actually kind of amazing if you can think of it in that way, because while I was going through chemo and other therapies for breast cancer, I took that time to revise the book that I wrote 12 years ago. And so here I am like in an illness, reading about how to transform. And I was amazed that, number one, that most of it was still relevant. But number two, I was able to add in a few things that I'd learned over the last period of years. And it was really amazing. So now that book has been totally revised, and I have some other stuff out there too that I'm working on. One of the things I'm really, really excited about that we can maybe get into a little later is what I call healing with your ancestors. And you can do that even if you're not.
Yeah.
So I think that we can talk about that a little bit as we go along.
Maybe we absolutely. So your journey has definitely been through several cycles of health, dis-ease, and all of those things. So what did you do to actually get through, just pick, all right, slow down. Pick one. I know it's like, got all these questions. All right. And everyone, I'm acknowledging my guides because it's like all of these words and all these questions want to come through right now. And if I'm not careful, I'll stumble over my own lips and my mouth. So
I do that too.
And we might even try to put words together along the way. Your journey has definitely been one of up and down, health and dis-ease, and yet here you are smiling. Your energy is amazing, and I'm not looking at you on purpose so I can get through the next question without everybody up here bombarding me. What if you would take just one example from your life of how it is you got from where you were to where you are? Maybe even sharing one of the challenges or the obstacles of what it took to reset your mindset to go through a transformation. Any one of those is, huge.
So for me, I think the core comes in with that, what I call marvelous messages. And that's why I have a book by that name now. My website's that name now. And it has to do, for me, I think I was born a writer. And so language and words are really key to me and how we use them. And I find when people talk about their symptoms and their pain and their illnesses and also their grief, which is another aspect of
Mm-hmm.
something that I've gone through with, so many people have passed in my life. With all of those, I find when people are explaining them or talking about them, they use a language that's unique to them. And I like to refer to that as talking to the mechanic. So, especially if you're a woman and you know nothing about cars and you go in and you're trying to tell the mechanic what's wrong, and you're like, it's making this funny noise and it bings and bangs, and the mechanic is looking at you like you're crazy, right? But
Mm-hmm.
you can only use the language that you know to explain what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, I think, happens for those of us who have very little medical knowledge, and we're trying to explain why I have a headache, or why my shoulder aches, or why there's something going wrong with my intestines, or I have a cranky knee or sore shoulder. And we have our own unique language for this. And what I find is when I'm working with somebody or myself, I take that unique language and I start to deconstruct it. One of the most amazing things is if you take certain words and you look them up, you find out that they have like these hidden meanings. And as you find out what these other meanings are, you get these huge ahas, and you go, this connects to something in my life that I'm not dealing with. This
Mm-hmm.
connects to something in my life that I probably knew that was going on, but I pushed it aside. So, for example, when I had Hodgkin's disease when I was 25, there was a lot going on in my life that I had pushed aside. And for me, I needed to stand up for myself. And once I did that, it's kind of a thing where you live it and then you go back and you go, how did I do that? Well, that's what I had done. I realized that when I did this later with that particular one, but when I analyzed the symptoms, looked at the languaging, and I was like, oh, I need to stand up for myself. Now, the amazing thing about this is when I did that the first time, I didn't have any knowledge about what I was doing. It just sort of happened. And I was like, isn't this cool how a lot of times if we have a symptom or an ailment or whatever, it kind of puts us back on track for where we're supposed to be heading, even without us knowing it consciously. But if you understand it consciously, you can make everything happen so much faster. And you can also prevent other things from happening, because once you're on track, all the doors start opening, all of the guides give us the guidance, and the people show up we need to know and learn from. And everything else just falls into place synchronistically. So I think that is the biggest core for me is understanding the deeper aspects of the languaging around a symptom. And here's something that I like to let people know is that, you know, when I was going through it and I didn't have this all mapped out and understood, you know, I read all the right books and I, you know, followed all the right people. And, you know, there's people like Louise Hay, you know, who is absolutely wonderful, but Louise Hay, Michael Lincoln, there's several others. They have these long, complicated lists. And you go and you like, look up this item. Oh, I have this cranky shoulder. Look it up. And then I have this specific affirmation I'm supposed to do, or this specific thing that, oh, this is what's wrong. And that never worked for me. I always felt like I somehow didn't fit into those boxes. So what I did was I kind of took that up another level and made it so it works with each individual. Because again, by going back to their individual languaging and digging deep into the meanings of those words, it's very unique and very specific. And when I work with people on this, they are sometimes aghast at how quickly I can bring up their BS, right? It's like they think they have this all hidden, and within 5 minutes I'm going bing, 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 this stuff is all popping up, and they're like, oh, how did you know? And I'm like, I didn't know. You know, it's all right here in your languaging, right? So, and they find that amazing, and it's also very transforming. You know, in a session that we do that kind of thing, it doesn't take long for that stuff to come up. And so I tell people, please, if you don't want to deal with your stuff, don't call me, because
you'll be dealing
there are
with
some things people don't want to deal with, right? They're just not ready, or for whatever reason, and they think they can hide that kind of stuff and it won't show up, but it does. So don't call me.
Did you know that this is where you were supposed to be doing your biggest work, your most transformational work?
I don't think so. All I know is as far back as 3 years old, I was trying to write words before I could even write. I was like, I had filled this entire notebook with like loops that connected in circles, because that's what I had seen writing look like, right? And my mom's like, why did you destroy this whole notebook? And I'm like, I was writing a book. And the other thing was, for some reason, when I was in that same 3 to 5 years old, my mother had bought me these flashcards. And I remember that they were quite large, because I remember the word refrigerator was like as far as I could stick my hands out. So I had these big flashcards of words. And I remember kept asking her, you know, what's this big word? And she'd be like, refrigerator, don't ask me again. You know, but I mean, how did she know to buy me flashcards with words? I mean, that's not like a typical thing that you would get for a kid, right? Especially a really young kid. And so somehow words and language and writing was all very key in who I was. And did I know it? Probably not consciously. I do know that when I was 16, I had a tremendous psychedelic-like vision that I didn't fully understand, but I knew something big was coming. And then another huge vision that happened when I would have been about, it was probably 91 or 92, you know, so, you know, I was somewhere in my 30s, and, you know, I was at that place in like kind of like one of those transition points where I was very depressed. I had some things go horribly wrong, and I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't even want to like live anymore. And I had this huge vision, and I realized again, like something big was coming, and I couldn't put it into words. I just knew that I had agreed to come and do it, and that I was going to be doing it. So I think sometimes it's not clear cut. One of my favorite stories, if you read the biography of Willie Stargell, who was a famous baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates, it talks about how when he was 2 years old, all he did was hit stones with sticks, and that he broke so many windows that his mother, didn't want him to hit stones with sticks. But it was like something inbred in him. It was something that he knew subconsciously. And I talk about that a lot in my books, about that desire that wells up within you, and you may not understand it. And I relate it a lot to Hans Christian Andersen's Ugly Duckling story.
Okay.
And in that story, if you read it, at one point, the ugly duckling ends up in a shed with an old woman, a hen, and a cat. And they're telling him, oh, if you can't purr, you're just not the cat's meow, and if you can't lay eggs, what good are you? Or you have to cluck, and he was like, all I want to do is swim, and they're like, oh, swimming, you can imagine a cat and swimming, right? Swimming, and he could not let it go. And he didn't really even know why. But that desire led him, as we know in the Ugly Duckling story, ends up, oh, I'm a swan, right? And so I use that analogy a lot to let people know that, they're swans, that they have like this inner desire that can lead them to something bigger and better and greater, that they have within them these tremendous gifts that as soon as they walk towards those desires, those gifts are going to manifest and lead them into all that they came here to be. So
interesting. I like the ugly duckling because in the ugly duckling looks in the mirror and sees this beautiful self that he or she has become.
That's right.
It's a metamorphosis in a lot of ways. What one challenge what was the biggest challenge in, you had this compelling need to use words and through pain and helping people dissect their languaging. How did you put all of that together to do what you're doing now?
That's a good question. I think it had to do with a series of events. What's the name of that book? A series of misfortunate events. And it was kind of like that. I had some surgery that went bad, and they came in the room and took one look at me, and they said, I was bleeding internally. So they rushed me down to a CAT scan or whatever it was. It was one of those tube-like things. And I was laying there, and I realized I was dying. And, I was like, well, I guess this is it, and I was like, well, I've been told that if you're dying, you should, have a life review. So is there anything I regret? And I thought about my husband and my sons. And at the time, my sons were old enough that I knew they were going to be fine. The core lessons were there or whatever. And it was like, but darn it, I didn't get that book written that I wanted to write. All the things that I could think of, right? Here I am, I'm probably dying, but I didn't write a book. And that's the one thing that really bothered me, or that I really regretted. And when I woke up, I had been in a coma for 3 days, and I could not talk because I had a breathing device down my throat. And I'm immediately using my hands and writing into my husband, letter by letter. And he's answering my questions that way. And I was like, what happened? And all this. And he's like, you've been in a coma for 3 days. It's like, we thought you were going to die. They didn't think you were going to make it. I told them you would. And,
you don't know my wife. She's coming back.
I had told him before we left for the hospital, I'd had this vision, and I was like, if anything happens to me, don't worry. I had phoenix vision, a vision of a phoenix, which phoenix rises from the ashes. And so I had told him as we were leaving for the hospital, and of course he was like, don't talk to me about that. But guess what? So, I healed up from that. I remember I went back to the doctor 2 weeks later, and I was kind of mumbling about, not having any energy. And he's like, Mrs. Saloff, you almost died. It's only been 2 weeks. Can you give yourself a little chance? And I'm like, I have all these things that I want to do. So, I had been working on writing, but I had struggled. It actually took me, I got one here. For this book, this transformational healing book, it actually took me 15 years to write it. And that was the book that like I had been working on, but there was something about it that wasn't coming together. And one of the things that I did at that time was I locked myself in my bedroom and I was like, all right, God, I don't know what it is that I'm supposed to do, but I need to be able to create a method that almost anybody can understand and help them, heal and transform their lives. And I started with like little sticky notes on just one word or one phrase per note and throwing them on the floor when just as fast as they came to me. And then like if I would get a pause, I would kind of put those into piles. And eventually like I looked down and it was like the bells went off and I was like, it's all here in the languaging of my, I connected to cancers where, it's kind of like Helen Keller learned to talk. And I was like, I looked down and it was a cancer that I had in 85 that was the breakthrough for me, because I realized as I talked about, well, what was that cancer to me? And to me, it was like rogue cells that kind of like usurped the other cells and were taking over. And I was like, oh, I was letting other people take over my life. And it's like when those bells went off, then I started like looking at other areas in my life and started connecting the dots all over. And I think that's where it first, like the first hints of it. It still took me some time to finish the book after that. It still took me years after that to put other things together. And then after that, I simplified that into this little book, which is the Marvelous Messages book. And you can tell this book is like super really thin, but it's just a little workbook that takes that method and breaks it down into like basic simple forms. So because to me, if it's so complicated you can't figure it out, what good is it, right?
Exactly. If it's too complicated, then if it's that complicated, then how are your clients supposed to carry on once they've gotten to a certain point and it's time for them to move on? They can't do it themselves. So what is the point of that? There was something I learned from my mom and dad. I think it was my mom and dad or someone a long time ago. Was in counseling or working with some kind of a coach before I even knew what it was, or my mom and dad who are both have their PhDs in psychology. And something always stuck with me. And I thought, yes, that's what I want to emulate. And you're just emulating that now when every client is going to graduate, because I don't want them stuck to me for life, because then I'm not doing them the right service. I'm not doing them for them. So to be able to write those books and to explain it and then have it simplified that someone could pick up the book and say, okay, I got this, but I want more, then they call you for this particular method. And even after they graduate, they still need to be able to do it, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
My father used to say, those who can do and those who can't teach. And I think he was wrong, because what I have learned over the years is it takes a special person to be able to take and teach something.
Yes.
A lot of people can do something, but they can't all teach what they do. And I
totally
found
agree with
that
you.
was, probably my struggle was getting past the me part of what I had learned and getting to the part where I could explain it to others so they could use it.
And then still value yourself, because that was not the message that you received growing up. And I heard that one too. Those who can't do, teach. And I'm like, okay, but why can't I do both?
Right. And it's funny because that was my father's side. My mother's side came from a whole line of teachers. So it's kind of like, when I talk about the ancestral connection, it's kind of like the two bloodlines like butted heads and go, we're going to work this out in a way you won't ever believe.
which is a topic for a whole nother discussion. Yeah, my dad thought that art was frivolous and you couldn't make a living at it, and yet my mom is very creative. So yeah, I get that. I get the analytical and the left brain and the right brain going, okay. And somehow they made it work. Wasn't always easy, but they made it work. What is one of the results or the benefits, not the benefits, but the results that you help your clients get? Can you give us a specific example without, violating anyone's confidence?
One person, my favorite one is that a woman that I know who's in her 70s went through the book and did every exercise explicitly and decided that her desire was that she wanted to play the organ. So she went to take organ lessons and met the love of her life, got married, and has had this wonderful second marriage, second love life. It is just fascinating. And that's, I had a woman who was able to buy her dream house. I had, there's just been so many interesting things that have happened to people who took this to heart. And the interesting thing is not all of them recognize that it started with this process, because it's not usually something that happens instantly, right? It's something that kind of happens over a period of weeks or months, but it's like I open the door and show them the way. I like to say, I shined a flashlight on the path. A friend of mine used to call us flashlights. She was like, it's like some people just have a flashlight and can show you the way. And so I was like, here's the flashlight, but they're the ones walking the path, right? They're the ones finding their way. So, I don't always get credit for what they do, and that's fine, but it's like I've seen some really amazing things happen.
It's interesting. So many people, and this is my experience and listening to what you're sharing with us, Jamie, is that so many people just want the thing to go away, and they're not realizing, or they want the instant manifestation of the dream house or the relationship or the bank account or the car or whatever, or the body. Okay, because we all know skinny is in, right? I'm being a little facetious, but
that's true. It's absolutely true.
And yet, when we think that that's what we want to do or to get to, but in order to get to that, there are so many other different layers that really need to come off. And so we want X, and in order to get X, we really ought to, because I don't like to use the shoulda, woulda, coulda, need to go through elemental P first. And when you lift off these layers of the pain and the grief, which are physical manifestations of dis-ease that begin up here, right? Then you can get to the want. Is that clear?
Here's another side of that people don't realize. When I first started out, one of my greatest desires was to get an article published. Write something, and it was going to be published in a magazine or a newspaper or something. It was going to be published an article. And I was like, wow. And what happens is, a lot of times when you start with that one little desire or want, and then you get it, you realize, oh, now what? And you realize there's something a little step higher and a little step higher and a little step higher. And next thing you know, you're accomplishing things. I mean, I didn't realize when I first had that desire to write an article, and when I first started taking some writing courses in that I was going to end up writing, I think I've written 7 or 8 books now, and I've written countless articles, countless blogs, on and on. And I had no idea that was even possible, which is, again, why I love the swan story, is because here's this ugly duckling walking around. He had no idea who he was, right? Nobody had ever given him an inkling that he could be a swan. And yet, poof, all of a sudden he becomes a swan. Because what happened? His mindset changed. So he was able to see himself for who he really was. And it's just amazing what we can accomplish when we can get that shift to happen.
Exactly. And on that note, please, first of all, thank you for sharing everything so candidly and about your life. So when this lady is telling you she can help you through your pain points, she's been there, unfortunately, too many times, but she gets it. And there's so much more to that. So please tell our viewers, beautiful, how they can find you.
Well, probably the easiest way is either through my website, which is marvelousmessages.com. And I'm going to set up a page just for those who watch this, which is going to be marvelousmessages.com/Terry Marie, all small letters. You don't have to put any spaces or anything in. Just as long as they can remember Terry Marie, they can find that special page. Another way to find me, of course, is, hop onto Amazon and look up Jamie Saloff. You'll find all my books there. The Transformational Healing book has just been revised. It finally came into ebook this year. It had never been in ebook form before. So especially for people who are on a tight budget or whatever, that's very affordable. So that's the easiest way.
And they can find you on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, but really, those have kind of been rendered kind of useless. So I mostly spend my time on my profile. I'm also on Instagram, Jamie Saloff on Instagram, and Twitter. I love social media. But I spend most of my time probably on Facebook when it comes to social media. I feel more comfortable there, I think, because I've spent so much time there.
I get that. And her name, Beautiful Soul, is spelled Jamie. Saloff is Saloff. That's Jamie Saloff. And it's marvelousmessages.com.
Yep.
Thank you again for being here, Beautiful Soul. And for everyone who is watching us at some point from somewhere, please do leave a comment and say hi. Let us know where you're from, what it was you liked most about this particular video podcast interview. And while you're at it, visit us at angeldreamteam.com and tap on the link for the Living Spirit and Wellness Global Directory. The beautiful Jamie is there. And in that capacity, she would help you write your book. Isn't that amazing? And perhaps you'd even like to join us. So again, thank you, beautiful, and we'll get back with you again very soon. Bye-bye for now, y'all. Thank you.
Thanks.